In this episode, I'm joined by Adam Vik, who is the player behind the Theist Bartleby, as we chat about introducing theism and religion into our campaigns. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 56, Introducing Theism, Nightfall settings, and looking for a group. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I'm your host, Inwils, and welcome to April. Yes, the clocks in the UK have eventually gone forward an hour, so we are now officially in British summertime. Although looking out of the window, it is cloudy, windy, and there is a slight drizzle. If I had unlimited funds, I would definitely follow winter around the globe. I'm not keen on sunny weather, and yesterday I even started to sneeze because of the pollen. Since classic fantasy is part of our rotation of games now, I need to think of a campaign world for the players to adventure in. While sorting through my RPG stuff that I recently rescued from a garage, I found the campaign worlds of Dark Sun and Earthdawn. Dark Sun I particularly like. The idea that magic has to be drawn from the ground, but as you do so, you kill and lay the land to a barren waste, somehow appeals to me. I read a book once that had a similar mechanic for magic, but they drew the life from people. The good sorcerers doing it gently and only taking what they could to keep the person alive, and the evil sorcerers pulling the magic from people until they were just desiccated husks. If I could remember the title of the book, I would recommend it to you, but I can't. So if you know, then please do add it in the comment section. Anyway, back to my new campaign world. I was wondering whether I could set a campaign world where it is always night and the weather is always wet, cold and windy. Of course, I imagine that everyone would flock to the demi-human races to have dark vision, but even then, I'm sure it would be interesting to play in such a campaign and for me to create for it. I even got to thinking that the world is actually underground, but the population is not aware of this. And the deities are actually another race gazing down on the characters and their exploits. I would definitely call this world Nightfall, hence the title in this podcast. A few months ago, I DM'd Spelljammer for a group of players. It was using the D&D 5th edition rules, but I do like the campaign setting for that game, when the ships are excellent and you're flying around in space. I think it would easily convert to classic fantasy, but I don't want it to become too similar to our M-Space game. Maybe I'll stick with the perpetual night setting and Nightfall. Yeah, that sounds good. Later on in the episode, I want to chat about something that I've wanted to do for a long time, but never really had the confidence to do it. But before that, let's talk about theism. In episode 55, I talked about introducing sorcery into your campaign worlds. I want to have a chat about all the options for magic eventually, apart from animism, since there have been many episodes already dedicated to that. But in this episode, I wanted to bring along Adam, who plays Bartleby Fumis. You probably know the player as Mr. Pickles. Onto the podcast so we can discuss about deities and religion and introducing theism into the campaign. So, welcome to Adam to the podcast.
Yes, I am Mr. Pickles. I've been playing in inwils Mythras game for years now. Coming up on a decade in a few years, I think.
Wow.
It's crazy. So I feel like I have a little bit of experience with both inwils and Mythras here. I've been playing Bartleby Fumis, the Theist, for this entire time, but I also play a lot of other games. Big fan of Savage Worlds. I've played a bit of Traveler, all over the place.
Nice. It sounds excellent. So we're doing some podcast episodes about introducing various magic into campaigns. And I thought it would be a really good idea to get you along because of Bartleby and theism and how we've introduced it to the campaign, which I think might be helpful for people listening about the steps that we've done and how we went about it from both a GM's point of view, but also a player's point of view. So first up, I think an important question to start off with is, should we have theism in our campaigns? Is it something that is really important, or, is there more things? What's your thoughts about theism in a campaign?
I think that you do sort of need theism in a system where you can get injuries pretty aggressively. So even if none of your players are theists, I think it is good to have that area in your town where people can recover and get their wounds back some way. And by the system, it seems like that's much better than, say, having a doctor in the group. They can stitch you up, but that's much, much worse than actually having those miracles.
And of course, one of the very high level miracles is resurrection. So it could actually bring players back from the dead, maybe in the future. So when I was thinking about theism, I needed to find a starting point. I was trying to think, where do I start to encourage players wanting to play a theist in the campaign? And I actually started with the deities. That's what I picked up first and started to detail those. Was that something that you enjoyed as a player? Was that something that you managed to hook characters or ideas onto?
Well, I came into your game with a very specific idea of, I really want to play the healer and I want to be able to do spells that buff my teammates, and I won't be the frontline guy, but I'm backing everybody up and making everybody else's characters better, stronger. So I knew exactly what I wanted, and I just needed the closest available option or to create something with you. And that's sort of where I feel about theism in general. If the player isn't directly interested, then any work you do on your pantheon or your idea should be relevant to the story you want to tell. If you're not going to do anything like with a fire god, I think like just a name is good enough to go from with that.
Yeah. Do you think belief systems are important? Because it's one thing that I really I'm having to change my belief systems at the moment in the campaigns because of the animist coming along with spirits, which sort of like it can possibly butt heads with theists and their belief system. So do you think the belief system is something important for a campaign? Is that something as a player you sort of like think, oh yeah, I need to tap into that?
I think it can be. It really depends on your players and how curious they are. I find myself having a tendency to rationalize it as a player, like, sure, Bartleby has a lot of knowledge about what his church believes, and anybody else could have a lot of knowledge about what they think that their beliefs are, but in the end, it's almost impossible for any character to be definitive. So as a player, I'm generally like, yeah, he might believe that, but Bartleby, he believes this.
Yes. So it's really down to characters in that case, isn't it? And what players want their characters to believe in the campaign. So let's talk about deities, because I spent quite a long time creating deities, and I do you think if somebody is introducing deities into their campaign, it's a case that they need loads of them or just a few of them? What do you feel is the best way in for players with that?
I think it can be overwhelming to new players. If you're entering into a new campaign setting and there's hundreds of gods, that can be really overwhelming. Even just seeing 20 brand new ideas, especially the more original you go with gods, as long as you have
Yeah,
something to like work with, like, okay, this is the healing god, this is the sun god, that makes sense. I got it. Weird name, but I got it.
yeah,
I think that's easier to work with, but um, I don't know. It's hard to say. Now, on one hand, I think you shouldn't put in effort in areas that aren't going to be utilized. But on the other hand, I mean, making a Greek pantheon type situation would be a
it's
lot of fun.
huge. Yeah,
A lot of different gods and goddesses and characters that would have actual impact on your player characters. I think that's an area where you could say, yeah, I should probably detail these gods, so when I randomly roll them into the story, things happen.
yeah. And being, because you GM games as well, so you have that campaign knowledge of your own campaigns. Do you think it's a case of we make deities for the characters, or do you think it's a better way forward is here are all the deities, you pick one? Which is your preferred way?
Oh, that is a tough question because really it comes down to what you've already written for the campaign. Like if your story is definitive, it's about this conflict between the messenger god and the sun god for some reason, then it becomes difficult when players are like, well, I worship the messenger god and I want to change these things. So on the
Yeah,
one hand, you want your players to invest themselves, but on the other hand, if it's already something you were wanting to do that conflicts with what they want, it gets difficult. I think at least in my case, it really wasn't. I wasn't going to be picky about the healing god, it's or goddess. I just
yeah.
wanted the appropriate channel to play the character that I wanted to play.
Got you, yeah. And it's interesting because how I approached it as the GM, I actually made up a huge amount of gods. You know, there's
Yeah,
and there's also the idea of old gods and new gods. And I'm not too sure how we stumbled across Amriel as the god. For people who don't watch the campaign, Amriel is a moon god, a lunar god, who's sort of like, well, she's very much attuned to buffing and healing. I think you would agree with that.
oh yeah, yeah. It's all healing magic or healing miracles.
Yeah. And I'm not too sure how I generated that, or whether or not we sort of like through discussion, we actually came to agreement with what Amriel would be doing, what her disciples would be doing, or whether or not, you know, it was all predetermined. That's the bit that I am a bit fuzzy about, you know, at the moment. There is Maroth as well, isn't there?
Yeah, the dark moon god, the twin brother to Amriel.
Yeah, and I think that's almost like the lunar opposite of Amriel. I think he's a lot more combat
Yeah,
orientated.
that's how you written it. Was the protective brother of Amriel.
Yeah, and it's so one thing that I'm really interested in is about should theists have access to all the spells, all the miracles, you know, and should because sorcery can be very limited, you know the like the Red Order, they only get fire spells and that's it. You know, they get nothing else. So Is it because I don't think I've ever said to you, you can't have this spell? You know, so how do you think people should play what miracles deities could be using?
Well, you did give me an Excel sheet that sort of broke down the miracles that were per deity that
Yeah.
you had envisioned. But I've always felt like if I could make a good argument, I could probably get something else. But to answer your question, no, definitely not. There should be limits. There are crazy miracles that do not fit with other miracles. Like I'm pretty sure one of them's like a lightning bolt where you just are like,
Yeah.
you're being smited by my god. There's like heart attack or something, or just
Heart seizure. Yeah.
heart seizure. That's insane, evil theist stuff that would be great for a villain to have, but not a healer. There has
Yeah.
to be limits for sure.
So do you think there should be evil gods? I mean, on both those spells, if you look at the description about heart seizure, it sort of like talks about it being a dreadful miracle known by the darkest gods. You know, that's how it's sort of like described as. So do you think there should be evil gods as well as good gods, if that's a thing?
I think that's sort of what I thought like saying theism really doesn't ascribe anything good or bad to it. Even though in theory you're playing a TTRPG, you want to be a good theist.
Yeah.
I think just by the presence of some of those miracles in hard quotes, yeah, there's got to be evil gods because the only like non-evil god that would have heart seizure might be like a chaos nature god, like the god of wolves. And so and even that's a weak argument.
Yeah. It's interesting that I don't know if you know this, but there's actually different forms of heart seizure. You can actually have seizure of any bodily organ. You can actually have, I'm sure that's the case. You can have things like lung seizure when the lungs stop working, or pancreatic seizure or something like that. I'm sure it's sort of like has a variety of other forms. So do you think those dark gods should be villains? Or do you think it's possible to play a character that has these, worships these dark deities?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's I don't want to say common trope, but there is a trope of having the villain on the good guy's side. One of my favorite video games from my youth was Diablo 2, which had the
Yeah.
Necromancer as a playable character. And I always thought that was really interesting because a Necromancer is evil, and always a villain. And to have it as a playable character that's like, I was bad, but there's worse things out there. I have to side with you guys. Don't hang me.
Yeah.
It's cool.
And I think that's in our campaign, Tarek, the animist, Tex was really determined to go with that darkness theme. And in sort of like, he has his death spirit and decay spirit, and he really wanted to go down that route. And I was talking when we're doing the animist discussion, we were talking about this idea of it's more about how you get things done rather than being good or evil. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is a good way to put it.
Yeah. So, if you want to go and raid a bandit's camp, an evil theist might say, I can give them all a plague, and then we can go in. Which would be meeting the aims, in just a different way altogether.
Using evil to destroy evil is semi-good.
Yeah, or using evil to meet the aims. So whatever you're wanting to do, you can actually do it in one or two ways, and I think that's important. it's something that doesn't happen in our campaign at all because there's only you that plays a theist. But do you think the interaction between deities is something that should be thought about by the GM if they're going to introduce theists into the campaign?
I do think it's relevant if things are violent. Like if there's two warring churches in the town, it's relevant to let your players know about that before they make their choices. But I think once that's in the game, then that is an interesting thing. The only time I think it stops being interesting is when it's directly the deities interacting. Like if you have the god of messengers fighting with the god of sun over the city, it's like as
Yeah.
players, that's not really anything you can work with. As the storyteller, that's an awesome scene, but the players, once they're like directly fighting against deities, it becomes a little bit like ants fighting a giant.
Yeah. And I think I put that into the orders of sorcery, but I haven't.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had to develop the theists at all. You know, I've done it in little bits. And I think as a GM, anybody who was introducing the theists, I think I would say, you know, work with your character and get one deity and then work on that. You know, decide what it's going to have.
So yeah, you're right. Is I haven't actually had any rival for Bartleby Fumus within your campaign. A rival church, I mean. There have been the new churches compared to the old ones that say like, oh, well, you're not even doing anything. Your goddess is fake.
Yeah.
And so I haven't really had any direct rivalries though. And I think that could be interesting, especially with my team that is sort of flippantly blasphemous about my my faith.
Yes. Yeah, well, they're almost like cynical. I see that they're very cynical of it until they need it.
And then they believe, and then they go right back to being cynical.
Yeah. One of the sorcery does have some healing spells in it.
That's right. The Order of the White.
Yeah. So in our campaign, it's the Order of White, but sorcery itself has rejuvenation, which is a healing spell. I think sorcery also has transfer wounds, which I quite like as a mechanic, you know, of basically saying, I'm going to take your wounds and I'm going to take your pain, you know, onto me. And that's why I asked about, do we have to have theists? Or is there a different approach that we can use? Do you think they're sort of like essential for campaigns?
Well, they're not essential, but taking away theism changes what your genre is, I think. The less healing options you have, the more grim and dark your campaign becomes. And if really all you have to heal with is the doctor in town and he charges a lot of coins, that's going to change the tone entirely of the game. Even minor wounds at that point become, okay, well, this is going to be months of a problem in my shoulder, and I'm the fighter.
Yeah. And do you think therefore it makes the players more careful?
It would have to eventually.
Yeah.
They'd either be suicidal or careful.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that's something that D&D 5th edition doesn't have. You know, the healing in that game is so natural and easy, you know, or sweep this potion, you know, and I think that's what I see as one of the major differences, that healing is a lot easier in 5th edition compared to Mythras, you know, but I think that promotes the area of theists. You know, I think
it definitely does. I'm waiting for somebody to get multiple serious wounds so I can pull out my heal body miracle and be like, everything wrapped up in 2 actions.
Yeah, and it just sort of like whack, you know, that's done. So in Mythras, your miracles as a theist is done on your level in the order, isn't it? That's correct.
That is correct.
Yeah. So do you find that restricting? In the sense that you can't get those high level spells, or even some of the lower level spells, aren't they? Because I think things like heal body and heal mind are only sort of like acolyte level, I think. So
That's
it's
correct,
not,
yeah.
so it's not something you start with necessarily. Do you find that order progression for the spells limiting or not?
I would say it doesn't feel limiting to me. I could see where it would feel limiting to somebody, but the offset to that is I have my devotion pool. And for somebody
Yeah.
who I call myself resource conservative because I hate spending points, I like to hoard my luck points, my magic points. And compared to the other casters who only have one pool,
Yeah.
like I just have one pool for my theism miracles and then one pool for all my folk magic. And that's very liberating to me. Having that offset is, yeah, I can't learn any spell I want at any time, but I have this entire pool just for sending out stun blasts or buffing my allies. And then I have another pool that makes it so I can focus on what I need to. A shock spell isn't going to waste my cure mind or cure blindness.
Yeah. So you've got
Um,
like these, and that's a good thing about the Theist, I think, that you've got two separate
yes.
resources that you can tap on.
And they increase too. The
Yes.
devotion pool increasing each time I go up a rank is a very good motivator. New access to new miracles and more power is awesome. But I also feel that a key thing with any kind of cleric, paladin, religious character is you need to have a degree of trust with your storyteller.
Yeah.
Because I mean, at any point you could just take my power away and say Amriel is disappointed in you. Especially if I started doing things to deserve it. But you need to have that trust that you're not going to have the rug pulled out from underneath you for no reason.
Yeah.
And with the different miracles that could come in handy, I never have felt that you have abused me for not taking something I couldn't even buy yet. Like you've never had me deal with a blind person. There have been times where laid arrest would be nice to have. And so eventually I did buy it. But you've never betrayed that trust of the theist there.
Yeah, so in the sense that you only have to deal with things that are of your level.
Yeah, in the adventures so far, there hasn't been anything that's like, sure, it'd be nice to have resurrect. Well, okay, sure, there have been moments, but there's never been a moment for a player where it's like, if only I was higher level, you'd be alive.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that if you're introducing theism, you have to put in the order because otherwise those spells are not limited. It's only when you get the cult rank that is limiting the spells. If you didn't have that in, then Theist could cast anything at any time. I want to pick up what you said about your god, or about Amriel, the moon god. How much leeway do you think a GM should give? I mean, should there be really set criteria saying this is what you must do in this order and you must stick to it? Is that something that you think is something that should come with the GM, or do you think that is something that you should co-create or develop as you move along?
I think that there's some implied rules with anything. Like obviously don't do anything to harm the church or that's funds, I guess, if you're going for a more greedy church. But like it's hard to argue that a Bartleby should be really good at sword fighting and loves to chop people up when he's working for a healing goddess. That's the sort of thing where I don't think we ever had to agree to that, but that was implied to be on the table. For anything weird, I think, well, I don't know. You haven't really set any rules for me, and I think that's sort of part of your campaign. Is the old gods are quieter, the new gods are being worshipped more, and I mean, you've made the church itself sort of like they've forgotten the goddess, and that Bartleby is the only believer. So it's hard to see what is true or not. And so we kind of, that forces me to make my own rules in a sense and hope that I'm doing on the right path.
Yeah, because every cult or brotherhood should have restrictions and oaths, and
Yes.
they're sort of like tied into the order, as we call them. And I've never sat down and written them for Amriel at all, preferring just to sort of like let it develop. And I think especially with new GMs, sometimes they have a tendency to try to create too much.
Yes.
You know, and really and truly what you should try to do is create the minimum, you know, and then move out from there, you know, and just sort of like giving the basic understanding of what the deity is all about should allow the player to develop it themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, you've told me that Amriel gives ominous visions, isn't very frequent with those. And I've heard Moon Goddess. So I thought Bartleby is always going to be trying to watch the moon at night.
Yeah.
And so we both sort of developed in the same direction there, I think, is how do these people pray? Well, probably at night.
Yes. And probably at midnight when the moon's at its highest. So there's certain things that we haven't touched on yet in our campaign. And one of them is that I know you have some ideas about this, is that all orders have gifts that they can have. And, you know, that you can have a gift from, you know, your deity, and you can actually invoke them by using magic points. What's your opinion about gifts, the sample gifts? I think it's the one that you really would like.
Want all of them. Yeah. No, I'm kidding. The one I really thought fit best with Amriel was, I don't know what it's called in the book exactly, but it makes it so you essentially never need to sleep.
Yeah, abstinence exists without one requirement of life, i.e. air, food, water, or sleep. Yeah.
And I thought sleep made the most sense because perseverance was one of the miracles that you said is associated with Amriel, one of the ones I took early on. I figured if you're up worshiping the moon at night, that is perseverance, staying awake, energized. I took the vigor folk spell to kind of go along with that. Picked up candles and a way to light my candles without matches because
with your folk magic,
up at night. And I think it would be the most natural evolution of our priest that always wants the midnight shift for watch to eventually become, I'll stay up all night. I'm ever vigilant over my flock.
Do you think that could unbalance the campaign? I mean, some of these gifts are really...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. 100% that could... I mean, it'd be very easy to abuse a lot of these. But I think I have so many limitations on Bartleby as it is, where even though he's picking up a new combat style, it's purely defensive.
Yeah.
I think all that would do is make it so you couldn't ambush us at night.
Yeah, or whatever's going to happen at night happens to Bartleby.
Always to me. I would be the one always screaming, "Wake up, everybody!"
Yeah, because all of a sudden, you know, you're the only one awake. So
that wouldn't change anything for the rest of the party. I mean, you don't penalize us for having to do like watches as it is. So that would almost just be a perpetually cosmetic thing. Bartleby is the one up at night on watch, and everybody gets a full night's sleep.
Yeah, and it brings into discussion, how do you get your magic points back? You know,
I would imagine I become like an elf there, where the entire night I'm meditating, being at one with my goddess rather than sleeping.
And I think that can be adapted. I just worry that some of these gifts are so powerful. In
Never needing
eyes.
To eat ever again. Oh, I can't abuse that.
But alacrity, a character rolls 1d6 plus 6 rather than a d10 for initiative. So they could actually get up to 12 But I'm surprised because I know you like Rabbit in Destin, who's lucky. And,
I do love Rabbit.
I know there's a lucky gift that says when rolling any skill test, the character can choose which way to read the D100. And so it's a bit like how we would use luck. And if it's a double digit, the results cannot be interpreted. And so you would implement that by using a magic point, and it would actually happen. So you could literally, your magic points would be the limit of your luck in that sort of like game. And
yes, please.
Yeah. And I mean, perfection allows you to raise a characteristic about 1d6 above the species maximum, which I think is incredibly powerful, because you can go above that 18. But my favorite one is, there's two. There's reincarnation. If killed, then the character's soul is reborn in the body of a suitable character 1d6 days after death, which I think is, your character's not going to die. I mean, it could end up in a squirrel, but it is there. And then resurrection. If killed, the character raises from the dead 1d6 days after death, their body completely healed of any and all damage done to it.
I'll take that one too.
Yeah, that's what worries me about them. And I think sometimes DMs get too focused on things like that, and they try to put too many restrictions into place rather than saying, okay, then let's just develop this religion as we go along. Would you agree as a GM or not?
I do agree. With all the experiences I've had, anytime I've done too much writing, that's been a detriment. I think you definitely, if you have a player that wants to be a theist, and I feel like that's sort of a rarity to have the healer in a group, you should work with them to make it what's workable for them, which I feel you've done with me. And in turn, I think I've mentioned trust before, but I think there's a trust when you have a player that has these super powered abilities that they don't go crazy with it. Like they put in some limitations so the character is reasonable rather than just a super powered monster.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to one of the things that you were saying earlier, on the sense that your miracles are bestowed on you. It's not you. The character itself does not have that power. And I think that's a really good restriction in itself, because at any point a GM could say, that's it. Your miracles have gone.
You can't resurrect that guy. I did not like him. I hated him. You tried to resurrect him. No.
And I think that really gives Bartleby some, or he must have a conscience, and he must really think about situations. Do you resurrect the person who has just wiped out several villages? Even if he's paying a huge amount of money, what is Bartleby's sort of like view about that? And I think at that point, that the idea of Amriel as a being and influencing decisions must come into play. What's your feeling about divine intervention? I don't know whether or not it is a thing in Mythras.
Oh yeah, I recall that, being able to call on my goddess to help me in a last-ditch effort.
Yeah. What's your thoughts?
I'd have to be pretty desperate if my memory serves on how those rules work. I haven't used it yet, but that would be a very desperate thing. Because doesn't that come with a pretty severe penalty?
Well, you have to be a high priest or a priest. in order to do it. That's the first thing. So that goes back. You actually make devotion rolls. And if your god results in helping you, then your devotion skill is reduced by 1d4 plus 1%.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so, but I never know whether or not that's a bad thing or a good thing, because that's like one skill roll, isn't it?
It's one of my most important skill rolls, though. That's what makes my shield so powerful.
Yeah, but if I took off 2% from your devotion pool,
I'm pretty sure I have 101% devotion, so that would bring me down a level.
Yeah, but I don't know whether or not it's... And the other thing I don't understand is why it would reduce your devotion skill. That's the other problem I have with it. I assumed
it was a punishment. Like your god or goddess is being like, okay, I will help you, but you need to go further to prove that this was worth it. You just need to do more. The more you call on me is how I assumed it was interpreted.
I just thought of it as I was trying to figure out why your devotion would go down. Your devotion skill goes down if you call on your god or goddess to sort of like call it in. But no, I see that now. It's almost like you should have dealt with this yourself. You need to, but you need to have more faith.
I like your perspective though. Like if you lose faith, it's just, yeah. I don't know if you're real though now. Now that I've seen you in person.
Exactly. And I sort of like think, ooh, should we go there? Or I'm wondering how desperate that situation would have to be for divine intervention. That's what I'm trying to think of.
I would have to be assuming that I'm about to die and all of my friends are about to die or something. Like that would be the level where I'd go, okay, you know what? It's worth the sacrifice. Devotion is really a measure of how much power your god or goddess is willing to give you.
Yes.
Rather than actual direct faith, even though that's how I phrase it all the time.
Yeah.
So I guess in a sense, it's just I would think that a god or a goddess would not really be that focused on mortals. And so the more that they're forced to focus on a specific mortal, the more they might be like, okay, you're helped now. I'm going to go do my other things.
Yeah.
You'll get less of a shield because I'm moving my orbit away from you slightly.
And I was thinking about it more sort of like high priest trying to protect a town.
I guess that would be a good use as well.
In the sense that they're stood there, the church is going to be desecrated and everything, and they sort of like call on the goddess to protect the town. But then I always think deities have a weird sense of humor, or in the sense that they wish for that, and the god just moves the high priest to somewhere else and says, start a new church, rather than doing anything to protect the actual town. They think of weird ways to do it without meeting the exact needs. So just I'm warning you about that. Just do you think theists should be able to change deities?
I was just thinking about this morning, actually, with devotion in my mindset as being faith. If you did start to build devotion to another god, shouldn't your devotion to all other gods be going down? Like, yes. I in theory, you should be able to have multiple faiths, but the more competing ones you have, the harder it'd be to get any specific one high up. Like I mentioned this early on in your campaign, talking to the new god of knowledge. Like I wanted to build up my knowledge skills, and there was some discouragement there because it was like, oh, so you want to be joining this other church? And it's like, well, no, I just want to use their supplies. So, well, what's wrong with our library? And I was like, yeah, that's a good point, actually. I should be focusing on Amriel and what she says is best, not going to another church and Because all they're going to say
yes.
is we just knowledge is power, and I'm going to say, well, yes, but I have to heal people too.
Yeah,
It'd be competing in the end.
yeah. I was just I can't even remember what the god of. Because I just made up a whole load of names. To be honest with you, and don't judge me for this, I actually nicked it from the Mythras book because it had a whole load of orders, and all I did was take that and gave them new names. But yes, there are the New World gods. Yeah, Gorwyn is the god of knowledge. Right. But there is a god, a New World god of death, which there isn't an old god. Dark Moon is there. Maroth is the closest. Are you suggesting that one devotion skill would go down while the other one's going up?
That's what I would think. I don't believe that's the rule, but from a logical perspective, I would think the more time I'm spending worshiping the knowledge god, reading in those libraries, consulting with those priests, my devotion of the knowledge god would be going up, but I'm not spending that time. Like the opportunity cost is not spending time worshiping Amriel. In theory, I'm drifting away from her, drifting away from her influence. And so I would expect when I summon up that shield after months of not being in her temple, it'd be much, much weaker.
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether or not I would play it in the sense that, okay, you haven't paid attention to me, so your devotion is now 0.
Well, I'm always praising Amriel.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense that I always see deities being very, I'm the most important one. Yes. Worship me. And if you worship anybody else, hard luck. Or maybe she would give some warnings.
I think she'd give me a few nightmares. She likes nightmares, that Amriel.
Or get that feeling that you roll your devotion and your exhort skill to cast the spell, but nothing comes. Even though you've been successful. And I just imagine Amriel saying, okay, then learn from this. If you want that shield spell, you need to come back and be more worshipping her rather than anybody else. What do you?
That's an interesting idea, because that just immediately made me think of divine intervention. Instead of decreasing your devotion, it would almost make more sense for the goddess, you said earlier, to be like, okay, here's a new village, build a church for me.
Yeah.
I did something major for you. You're paying me back.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And I do like that concept, because that's more working with the story and making your theism actually relevant to the game as a whole.
Yes. And I think it also helps with the story in the sense that the theist is not the power.
Yes.
It's the deity that is the power. And I think that's the difference to me between exhort and devotion. Devotion is the power behind the spells, isn't it? Rather than actually casting them. You can cast them as much as you want, but if your devotion is really low, then that's
not very powerful.
No, yeah, exactly. It would just be disastrous. I got 2 more questions because time's moving on. How do you see theists and animists from Bartleby's point of view? Because
from Bartleby's point of view, he thinks that he'd probably see the spirits as like minor gods. Like if you were to say, oh, I worship a bog spirit, Bartleby would be like, huh, okay, weird. I've seen shrines to various things. I know there's a nature god. There might be a pantheon, but I'm not in that church, so I don't really understand the hierarchy of nature spirits. And any talk of, well, this is what the afterlife is actually like, Bartleby, would be like coming from somebody who worships a bog spirit. That's real rich.
Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah, you're probably right.
Right, yeah.
As a player, I find it really interesting to have all these things coexisting. And it does make me think in the background. So what is the truth of it all? What is the actual pantheon? Where do these spirits fall in with Amriel? And does Amriel have any spirits that would be relevant to her?
Nice.
Because
Oh, yes.
they would
Yeah.
have to coexist. If there's like a fire god, fire elementals would probably be, or fire spirits would probably be associated with that church, but theists might not necessarily be trained the same way to interpret it.
I totally understand and get you, and I think that's the. It's interesting. In the campaign, there are spirit deities.
Oh,
You know,
I did not know.
no, and so what? And they're very much assigned to sort of like things like life and rebirth or something like that, or rivers and lakes. So they are connected to the environment or whatever. But it's interesting that I've actually created that there is a spirit deity. So Tarek actually worships a spirit deity, you know, and that it's the spirits that give him the power, but he's actually worshipped something that he gets no power from. Does that make sense?
That is interesting. I was just thinking Animus would be forcing these spirits essentially, or coercing or bribing them in some way to do their job, the binding role. Whereas a theist goes about it a different way, even if it's the same visual result. Like they go through it through worship, and exhort is a strong request, almost like begging. Like, please do this for me. It will help our cause, help your cause.
Yeah. And
he just says, kill. Just go kill now.
Yes. And I think because the spirits are bound to him, they are attached to a fetish, so they're actually his allies.
Do they like him?
The ones that are actually attached to him, yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know,
that's good. That's good. So, they like him.
Yeah. So it's in the same way as, so he can gain new spirits by using 5 experience rolls.
Ooh.
Like you would get a new spell.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like his spirits are his spells.
Yeah. And then he also has folk magic.
Yeah. And then every time he gives a command, that's taking a magic point. You know,
is that an action to give a command, or is it a free action?
No, it's the summoning and the order are part of the same. But if you want to change your action, then that is you have to do a binding check and do it again. So it would be the case that if he said, now going to do that, and he failed his binding roll, then the spirit would probably just go back into the fetish. And that would be it. You know, so it's literally the best way I think about it is his spirits are his spells.
Yeah.
You know,
and if he doesn't give them power, then they can't do anything, no matter how much they want to or don't want to.
Yeah. And there is one that he might lose control over, but I'm not going to spoil that for you.
I'm already scared.
Just wait till that happens. So just to sum up, what advice would you give to a new, well, let's start with a new player, a player who wants to play a theist? What would be your advice for somebody who's got that in their head, that's the character that they want to play?
If you're choosing to play a theist, I would say get your theme on point and figure out what you want to be able to do, because there are a lot of different themes of what you can cover and help out the group with. Yeah. And I mean, healing is the easiest one, but there are other options of what you might want to do. Just pick your lane and build your miracles on that, and then supplement them with folk magic. I think that's the best way to get a rounded theist effectively.
Yeah, and we have to say that in our campaign, folk magic are like your minor prayers, aren't they? Correct. Just as they are cantrips to Cyrus, who's the sorcerer. I think that is really brilliant advice, and I think my advice to a GM would echo that, and almost like say, okay, then don't feel you have to create everything. You know, it's you can't. Number one, you can't do it, and number two, you are planning the wrong things. You could spend a whole week developing a deity, and the character says, "No, I don't want to play that one." Yep. You know, and in which case it's just wasted. So it's a bit like if you look at the deities and you look at the sorcery orders, only the ones that people play are developed. Yep. So the Order of the Kraken, which is the blue order of sorcery, that is developed, but not as much as the Order of the Phoenix. Because Cyrus has been playing that for longer, and so we've had to think about different levels of spells. And I think that's what happens with theists. You know, I got the basic outline of gods and deities and then said, okay, then which one do you want to play? And then focused in on that one. And that's where I think we've got, I think at one point I had to do some revision of the rules or add more to it about being defensive people and things like that, didn't I?
Yes, down the line after you tripped me up after I decided to not parry with my mediocre combat style.
Yeah.
Then I came back to you and said, you know what, I'd like to be able to actually not get tripped when your bandits have specials. So that's where we developed like, so who would actually be in the church protecting it while it's being invaded, while the higher ups flee or the wounded flee.
Exactly. You know, and that's when we came up. And I think that's my other piece of advice to GMs who are bringing theists into the campaign is let the campaign develop the order and the goddess, etc. You know, and that when I say the campaign, I mean the interactions with the players and the world, and let that develop the theists rather than trying to pre-made everything. There is a huge question of whether or not all theists should be healers, because I always remember being a cleric in D&D, and you were expected to have cure-like wounds. You know, it was a go-to. But I think that comes back to this idea of which deity do you want to follow, you know, and then that's it. Anything else you would like to say about theists in general?
I just got to agree with you on your last comments. There is just really for players, it's more interesting and more important the firsthand knowledge they get of things. Especially orders and how people interact, rather than anything you write in the background. You can write a bunch of paragraphs about what the church is like, but their interactions are going to be much more impactful. And that's where I feel like you can have tons pre-written, but if it doesn't interest them, they won't go and interact with it.
Exactly. So thank you for spending time with us on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. And long may Bartleby command the power of Amriel.
Huzzah!
Yeah. Remember, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not just drop me an email or message on Discord and let me know what you would like to cover. We are always looking for reviews or chats with people, so if you are interested, you can email me at inwils@gmail.com or send me a message on the Discord or the various forums I frequent. I remember a day when I was reading so many rule books but not having anyone to play an adventure with. When I was younger, we would play Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition a lot, but when I tried to introduce other games such as Traveller and Call of Cthulhu, the adventures never really happened. As the Mythras Discord has gone under some updates, I think, I actually discovered the channel called Looking for Group, or LFG. I'm assuming this is a channel for people who are looking for a campaign to join so they can advertise their willingness to play. I have seen other content creators organizing games for people. I think I am getting to the level that I could possibly GM for another group or for new people, but I do worry about two things. First, finding the time to prep and play the adventure. I really do not know where all the time goes. And secondly, that people might play the game differently to how I GM it. I recognise that there is no right or wrong way to play, but I am not a person who likes powerful characters, preferring a more relaxed and dangerous campaign setting. It will be my summer vacation soon, and I was thinking of trying to get a group together who don't have a regular playing group and maybe GM some sessions. It would be online, so there will be different time differences to consider, but that should be about it. So what do you think? Is this something that I should pursue, or do you think I should continue to perfect my own skills before offering to GM for others? As always, let me know in the comments below. And that's it, another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Don't forget you can check out all my content by subscribing to my YouTube channel and the campaign areas on World Anvil. I recently released all my content on World Anvil, so you don't have to be supporting me with your hard-earned cash in order to see it. But there is an option to donate if you wish. I really do appreciate all your support, and do check out the Tapper Talk forums and the Discord, where there are some great people sharing their ideas in the discussions. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat to you all again in May. Until then, I hope all your posed roles succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.